The judge sneered at the veteran's medals, his voice dripping with disdain. Silver Star, Bronze Star, Purple Heart. Tell me, where does one purchase such an impressive collection these days? The courtroom fell silent in shock. Remove those fake decorations immediately or I'll hold you in contempt, the judge ordered, as the veteran stood perfectly still, jaw tightening. That's when the courtroom doors opened. A general in full-dress uniform strode forward, stars glinting under the fluorescent lights. "The sergeant will stand fast," he commanded, his voice cutting through the room. The judge's smug expression vanished as he realized his devastating mistake. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If stories of quiet dignity inspire you, subscribe to see more moments when truth silences injustice. The Harrisonville County Courthouse stood as a monument to traditional judicial authority. Marble columns, polished wooden benches, the imposing bench where Judge Prescott Hargrove presided with the detached superiority of someone who believes his position places him beyond question. The American flag hung prominently behind him, a silent witness to the proceedings. Sunlight filtered through tall windows, casting long rectangles of light across the worn carpet. The room smelled of wood polish and old paper, the distinctive scent of a place where lives were changed by the stroke of a pen or the fall of a gavel. The morning had begun like any other, a steady procession of cases moving through the system with the efficient indifference of long practice. The courtroom buzzed with the usual morning activity: attorneys shuffling papers, court officers directing traffic, citizens awaiting their turn before the law. The gallery was unusually full today, a detail that would seem insignificant until later. Local reporters occupied their customary seats, mostly checking phones between cases, anticipating nothing remarkable in the day's proceedings. Sergeant First Class Thaddeus Caldwell stood before the bench, his posture military straight, despite civilian clothes. His appearance was unremarkable at first glance. Average height, weathered face, the quiet demeanor of someone accustomed to observing before speaking. Only the row of medals pinned to his lapel hinted at a history beyond what was visible in the courtroom. His hands hung relaxed at his sides, neither fidgeting nor clenched, the hands of someone comfortable with stillness. The case itself seemed routine, a dispute over property adjacent to a veterans rehabilitation center that Caldwell helped manage. The legal details were complex, but ultimately secondary to what was about to unfold. Like many such cases, it hinged on zoning regulations, community impact assessments, and competing claims of public benefit versus private development rights. "Mr. Caldwell," Judge Hargrove began, deliberately omitting his military rank, "you have submitted character testimony regarding your qualifications to oversee this expansion project." His tone carried thinly veiled disdain. "You expect this court to be impressed by your decorations?" A court reporter's fingers paused briefly over her stenography machine. Several attorneys exchanged glances. Something in the judge's tone suggested this was veering from standard procedure into personal territory. The slight emphasis on the word decorations hung in the air, already transforming the medals from honors to mere ornaments. "I included my service record only as it pertains to my qualifications for managing the project, Your Honor," Caldwell responded evenly, his voice carrying the measured control of someone accustomed to maintaining composure under pressure. Nothing in his demeanor suggested offense taken or alarm at the judge's tone, just the slight straightening of an already straight back. Judge Hargrove leaned forward, eyes narrowing on the medals. "Silver Star, Bronze Star, Purple Heart," he read with theatrical skepticism. "Quite the collection. Tell me, where does one purchase such an impressive display these days? Army surplus stores? Online retailers?" A shocked murmur rippled through the courtroom. The opposing counsel, Attorney Wainwright, smirked, clearly pleased with the judge's approach. Caldwell's attorney, Alara Davidson, rose to object, but was immediately silenced by Hargrove's raised hand. Her face flushed with indignation as she slowly resumed her seat, eyes darting between her client and the judge. "Your Honor, with respect," Davidson began, her voice tight with controlled outrage. "Respect is precisely what is at issue here, Counselor," Hargrove interrupted. "This court has seen a parade of self-proclaimed heroes. The digital age makes it remarkably easy to craft a heroic backstory, does it not, Mr. Caldwell?" The question hung in the air, rhetorical and accusatory. Several people in the gallery shifted uncomfortably in their seats, the atmosphere thickening with tension. A court officer near the door straightened, his own military bearing suggesting personal discomfort with the scene unfolding. Caldwell stood perfectly still, the only movement a subtle tightening around his eyes. "Sir, these medals were earned during my 3 tours in," he began, his voice still measured despite the provocation. "Spare us the war stories," Hargrove cut him off, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "I have heard enough theatrical performances from weekend warriors to last a lifetime." The gallery's murmurs grew louder. An elderly man in the back row stood abruptly and exited, his face flushed with anger. Several phones were surreptitiously raised, recording the increasingly unusual proceedings. What had begun as a routine property dispute was transforming into something else entirely, a public examination of valor and truthfulness with Caldwell at its center. Judge Hargrove picked up a document from his bench, scanning it with exaggerated scrutiny. "Your petition claims this. Expansion is essential for veterans recovering from combat trauma, yet your organization's financial records show inconsistencies that suggest mismanagement at best, fraud at worst." This was clearly news to Caldwell, whose composure slipped momentarily, genuine surprise crossing his features. "That is not possible. Our books are," he started, confusion evident in his tone. "Are you now questioning this court's findings, Mr. Caldwell? Perhaps that is the kind of insubordination that earned you these trinkets." Hargrove gestured dismissively toward the medals, the word trinkets landing like a slap in the silent courtroom. Caldwell's hands formed fists at his sides, then deliberately relaxed, a small detail noticed by several observers. The self-control required for such restraint was evident to anyone watching closely, a silent testament to discipline that contradicted the judge's implications of fraudulence. Attorney Davidson tried again. "Your Honor, Sergeant First Class Caldwell's military record has been verified through official channels. We have documentation," she insisted, desperation creeping into her professional demeanor. "Documentation can be falsified, Counselor. I have seen it before in this very courtroom." Hargrove's voice rose, playing to the gallery now. "Men like your client, trading on stolen valor, using fake credentials to gain advantages over honest citizens. It is an insult to those who actually served." The irony of his statement hung in the air as Caldwell stood silently, absorbing the accusation without visible reaction beyond a tightening of his jaw. His eyes, however, had changed, not with anger, but with a depth of weariness that suggested this was not the first time he had faced such dismissal of his service. In the gallery, a court reporter quietly slid her phone from her pocket, fingers moving subtly over the screen. An older veteran in the front row shook his head in disgust, his expression suggesting this was not the first time he had witnessed such treatment in this courtroom. The American flag behind the judge seemed to take on new significance, a symbol invoking different meanings to different observers. "Your Honor," Caldwell finally spoke, his voice level despite the attack. "With respect to the court, these medals," he began, one hand moving slightly toward his lapel. "These medals," Hargrove interrupted, "mean nothing here. This court deals in facts, Mr. Caldwell, not war fantasies. The fact is, your petition is denied, and I am ordering an investigation into your organization's finances and your personal claims of military service." The gavel came down with a crack that echoed through the suddenly silent courtroom. For a moment, time seemed suspended in the aftermath of this public humiliation. Caldwell stood motionless, neither protesting nor retreating, a solidity in his bearing that contrasted sharply with the judge's theatrical display of authority. "Furthermore," Hargrove continued, seemingly energized by his own authority, "I am recommending an investigation into possible stolen valor charges. The Silver Star is our nation's 3rd highest combat decoration. To claim it falsely is not just dishonest, it is criminal." Attorney Davidson rose again, her professional demeanor cracking under mounting outrage. "Your Honor, this is completely inappropriate. My client's service record," she protested, color high in her cheeks, legal arguments abandoned in the face of such blatant injustice. "Your client's alleged service record, Counselor," Hargrove corrected with smug condescension, the key word being alleged. In the gallery, several observers were no longer bothering to hide their phones as they recorded the proceedings. One woman was typing rapidly, her screen reflecting a social media interface. What began as a routine property hearing had transformed into something that felt increasingly like a public spectacle, a humiliation broadcast beyond the courtroom walls. Attorney Wainwright, representing the development company opposing Caldwell's petition, saw an opportunity. Your Honor, given these revelations about the petitioner's credibility, we move for immediate dismissal with prejudice and request sanctions for filing fraudulent documentation. Motion granted, Hargrove responded without hesitation. Mr. Caldwell approached the bench. Caldwell stepped forward, his movements measured and controlled despite the devastating blow to his case and the personal attack on his integrity. As he approached, the courtroom doors opened quietly at the back, admitting a new observer whose entrance went largely unnoticed amid the tense exchange unfolding at the bench. At the bench, Judge Hargrove's voice dropped to a theatrical whisper, still audible to the front rows. "Men like you disgust me," he told Caldwell. "Real soldiers die while pretenders like you profit from their sacrifice." For the first time, Caldwell's control slipped momentarily, revealing a flash of something that made even the judge pause. Not anger, but a profound weariness that spoke to burdens beyond what was visible in this courtroom. His shoulders dropped almost imperceptibly, not in defeat, but in recognition of a battle that could not be won through conventional means. "Your Honor," Caldwell responded quietly, "the men who died were my brothers. I carried them," he said, the simple statement heavy with unspoken meaning. "Spare me the performance," Hargrove interrupted, raising his voice again for the benefit of the gallery. "The only thing you have carried is this charade. Remove those medals immediately, or I will hold you in contempt." A court officer stepped forward uncertainly, clearly uncomfortable with the order, but bound by duty to enforce it. His hand hovered near his belt, eyes darting between the judge and Caldwell, seeking any alternative to physically enforcing such an unprecedented command. In the back of the courtroom, few noticed the entrance of Brigadier General Everett Remington, who slipped into a back row seat, his full dress uniform in stark contrast to the civilian attire around him. The morning sunlight caught on his insignia, briefly illuminating the silver stars on his shoulders. He watched intently, his weathered face revealing nothing of his thoughts, but his posture suggested a man assessing a tactical situation rather than a casual observer. Caldwell stood motionless at the bench, caught in an impossible position. To remove the medals would be to symbolically renounce the truth of his service, yet to refuse would trigger further legal consequences in a proceeding that had already spiraled beyond reason. His hand moved slowly toward his lapel, fingers hesitating over the silver star. "I earned these medals in service to my country, Your Honor," he said, his voice steady despite the strain evident in his eyes. "Removing them would dishonor the men who did not come home." "This is not a negotiation, Mr. Caldwell," Hargrove snapped. "Officer, assist the gentleman if he finds following simple instructions too challenging." The court officer took a reluctant step forward, discomfort plain on his face. The gallery had fallen completely silent, the collective tension making the large room feel airless and confined. Several people were openly recording now, phones raised without pretense of concealment. Attorney Wainwright, sensing an opportunity to curry favor with the judge, rose again. "Your Honor, given these revelations about the petitioner's credibility, we request the court consider punitive damages for filing fraudulent documentation and wasting the court's valuable time." "A reasonable request," Hargrove agreed, his attention momentarily diverted from Caldwell to his eager supporter. "The court will entertain motions for sanctions after Mr. Caldwell complies with the order to remove those fraudulent decorations." Attorney Davidson stood, papers clutched so tightly in her hands they crumpled audibly in the tense silence. "Your Honor, I must formally object to these proceedings. My client has submitted notarized documentation of his military service record. The court has not reviewed this evidence before making these accusations." "Objection noted and overruled, Counselor." Hargrove dismissed her without even a glance in her direction. "The court is quite capable of recognizing fraudulent credentials without wasting time on manufactured documentation." In the gallery, reactions were becoming more visible. An older woman dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. Two men in the back row, both wearing veterans' organization caps, shook their heads in disgust. A young law student frantically scribbled notes, clearly recognizing the procedural irregularities unfolding before them. "Your Honor," Caldwell spoke again, his composure regained, I respectfully request a brief recess to consult with my attorney regarding this order. Request denied, Hargrove replied sharply. This is a simple matter of removing those fake decorations from your lapel, not a constitutional crisis requiring legal consultation. Comply with the court's order immediately. Caldwell's hand finally moved to the Purple Heart, the medal awarded exclusively for wounds received in combat. His fingers touched it briefly, almost reverently, before he began to unfasten it. The pin resisted slightly, as though even the medal itself objected to this indignity. In the back of the courtroom, General Remington rose silently and began making his way forward, his movement initially unnoticed amid the tension. The silver stars on his shoulders caught the fluorescent light as he advanced with measured steps down the center aisle. His presence began to register gradually, heads turning as he passed, murmurs rising then falling into deeper silence. As Caldwell removed the first medal, holding it momentarily in his palm before placing it on the bench, the court officer assigned to enforce the order took a small step backward, eyes now fixed on the approaching general. Something in Remington's bearing, the quiet authority of his movement, signaled that the situation was about to change fundamentally. Judge Hargrove, focused on his triumph over Caldwell, remained unaware of the approaching figure until a shift in the gallery's attention caused him to look up. His expression flickered from satisfaction to confusion as he registered the full dress uniform, the insignia of rank, and the unmistakable purpose in Remington's approach. Caldwell's fingers moved to the silver star, pausing as he sensed the shift in the room's atmosphere. He did not turn, maintaining his position of respect before the bench, but a subtle change in his posture suggested awareness that something had changed. As Caldwell began to unpin the second medal, his fingers visibly unsteady for the first time, General Remington reached the courtroom divider. His voice, accustomed to command on battlefields, cut through the silence with quiet authority. The sergeant will stand fast. The courtroom fell completely silent as all eyes turned to the source of this unexpected intervention. General Remington's uniform spoke before he did. 4 decades of service represented in ribbons and insignia that told a story even civilians could read. The battle ribbons, service medals, and combat decorations created a visual history of American military engagements spanning multiple conflicts. Judge Hargrove's expression flickered between confusion and annoyance at this interruption of his authority. "This is my courtroom, sir. Observers will remain seated or be removed." "I am not here as an observer, Your Honor," Remington responded, his voice remaining measured but unmistakably authoritative. "I am here as a witness." "This is not a trial, General." Hargrove let the question hang, deliberately omitting Remington's name, despite the clear identification provided by his uniform. Brigadier General Everett Remington, United States Army, currently serving as Deputy Commander of the 10th Mountain Division. And with respect, Your Honor, it appears that Sergeant First Class Caldwell is very much on trial in this courtroom. The atmosphere shifted palpably. Caldwell's eyes widened slightly in recognition, though he maintained his military bearing, neither smiling nor showing relief at this intervention. His hand moved away from the medals, returning to his side in the position of attention. "General Remington," Judge Hargrove said, recovering his composure, "while we appreciate your service, this court is handling a civil matter regarding property development, not a military tribunal." "Yet you have chosen to put the sergeant's service record on trial," Remington countered smoothly. "As his former commanding officer, I have direct knowledge of how those medals were earned." A current of reaction rippled through the courtroom. The term "former commanding officer" landed with particular weight, transforming what could have been dismissed as a sympathetic veteran's intervention into something far more significant. Attorney Davidson's expression shifted from desperate outrage to cautious hope as she recognized the potential turning point. "Your Honor," Davidson interjected, seizing the moment, "we request General Remington be permitted to address the court regarding Sergeant Caldwell's service record, as it has now been made central to these proceedings by Your Honor's comments." Judge Hargrove was caught. To refuse would appear obstinate at best, prejudicial at worst, especially with dozens of phones now openly recording. His expression darkened as he recognized the corner into which he had painted himself. The authority he had wielded so confidently moments before was suddenly precarious. "Very well. General Remington may make a brief statement, but let me be clear, this does not change the court's ruling on the property matter." Hargrove's attempt to maintain control fooled no one. The shift in power was already evident in the straightening postures of the gallery, the renewed attention of the reporters, and most notably, in Caldwell's subtle relaxation from rigid endurance to patient certainty. As General Remington stepped through the gate to the court proper, the assembled crowd noticed something they had not from a distance. He walked with a slight limp, and his right hand bore the distinctive scarring of severe burns. These were not the untouched hands of a desk commander, but the marked body of someone who had experienced combat firsthand. The court fell completely silent as he approached the bench, stopping beside Caldwell, who automatically stood at attention despite his civilian clothes. The visual contrast between the two men, one in full military dress and one in civilian attire, created a bridge between worlds that contextualized the metals at the center of the controversy. Attorney Wainwright, who had been so eager to capitalize on the judge's attack, now seemed to be trying to distance himself from what had transpired, suddenly busy reorganizing papers that needed no organization. His earlier smug approval had vanished, replaced by the careful neutrality of someone reassessing which way the wind was blowing. General Remington stood beside Caldwell, the contrast between the general's dress uniform and Caldwell's civilian attire creating a visual bridge between military and civilian worlds. For a moment, he surveyed the courtroom with the measured gaze of someone accustomed to assessing situations under pressure. "Your Honor," Remington began, his voice pitched to carry without strain, "I understand your skepticism. Stolen valor cases do exist, but there is a reason verification processes exist before accusations are made." Judge Hargrove shifted uncomfortably, clearly regretting the corner into which he had backed himself. "General, while I appreciate your concern, this court has the authority to evaluate the credibility of any witness or petitioner." "Absolutely, Your Honor, and I am here to assist in that evaluation." Remington's tone remained respectful but unyielding. "I personally recommended Sergeant First Class Caldwell for the Silver Star after witnessing his actions during an operation in Kunar Province, Afghanistan, on April 17, 2013. The specificity of the date landed heavily in the courtroom. This was not vague character testimony, but precise recollection. Several members of the gallery leaned forward, suddenly aware they were witnessing something extraordinary. "Our forward operating base was hit during a complex attack. 3 wounded soldiers were stranded in an exposed position under heavy fire." Remington's voice remained steady, but something in his eyes changed as he accessed the memory. "Sergeant Caldwell, then a staff sergeant, crossed 70 meters of open ground under sustained enemy fire to reach them." Caldwell's posture remained rigid, his gaze fixed forward, but those closest could see the slight elevation in his breathing, the memories clearly present for him as well. The Purple Heart that Judge Hargrove had so casually dismissed now took on vivid context. The first soldier he carried back was already dead on arrival. The second died of his wounds despite Caldwell's attempts at field treatment. The third survived because Caldwell used his own body as a shield during the extraction, sustaining the wounds that earned him the Purple Heart you so casually dismissed, Your Honor. Judge Hargrove's face had lost its imperious confidence. "General, he began, but his voice faltered. "I am not finished, Your Honor." Remington's voice remained measured, but carried unmistakable authority. "That third soldier was my son, Lieutenant Christopher Remington. The court may wish to note that for the record." A collective intake of breath rippled through the courtroom. The personal connection transformed what might have been dismissed as professional courtesy between military men into something far more profound. Attorney Davidson was frantically taking notes, her earlier outrage transformed into focused determination to capture every word of this unexpected testimony. The Bronze Star with Valor device was awarded during Sergeant Caldwell's second tour for actions that saved 16 Afghan civilians trapped in a village targeted by insurgents. The details of that operation remain classified, but I am authorized to confirm the decoration's authenticity. Remington reached into his uniform pocket and produced an official document bearing Department of Defense seals. "This is Sergeant Caldwell's DD-214, his official discharge and service record. I have taken the liberty of having it authenticated by the Department of the Army this morning when I received word of these proceedings." He placed the document on the bench before Judge Hargrove, whose complexion had paled considerably. The document lay between them, physical evidence of the judge's catastrophic error in judgment. Your Honor, Remington continued, I understand civilian courts operate under different protocols than military tribunals, but certain constants should prevail in any arena where judgment is rendered: presumption of innocence, verification before accusation, and basic respect for those who have sacrificed in service to this country. The courtroom remained utterly silent. Even Attorney Wainwright, who had been so eager to capitalize on the judge's attack, now seemed to be trying to distance himself from what had transpired, suddenly busy reorganizing papers that needed no organization. Furthermore, Remington added, the financial irregularities you referenced appear to be the result of a clerical error in how donation matching from the Veterans Administration was recorded. I have been on the advisory board of the Rehabilitation Center for 3 years and can attest to Sergeant Caldwell's impeccable management. Judge Hargrove now faced a complete unraveling of his position. The court appreciates this clarification, General, he began, clearly seeking an exit strategy from the situation he had created. With respect, Your Honor, appreciation is not what is called for here. Remington's voice took on an edge for the first time. What is called for is rectification. Remington turned to face the gallery, many of whom were still recording. Ladies and gentlemen, you have witnessed an injustice today, not just against Sergeant Caldwell, but against every service member who has earned recognition through sacrifice. He turned back to the bench. Your Honor, I respectfully request that you withdraw your earlier statements, approve Sergeant Caldwell's petition as originally submitted, and issue a formal apology for the unfounded accusations against his character and service record. Judge Hargrove was trapped by the public nature of his earlier behavior and the indisputable authority now contradicting him. The courtroom waited, the power dynamic completely inverted from minutes earlier. The American flag behind the bench, which had seemed merely decorative before, now loomed with symbolic weight over the proceedings. After a moment's hesitation that felt eternal, Hargrove cleared his throat. In light of this new information, this court withdraws its earlier comments regarding Sergeant Caldwell's service record and vacates the order denying his petition. It was the bare minimum, offered without sincere contrition, and the gallery's reaction made clear it was insufficient. Murmurs rose again, now with an edge of indignation rather than shock. General Remington remained standing, his silent presence demanding more. The medals on his own chest caught the light, among them, the same silver star that adorned Caldwell's lapel. The visual connection between the two men's decorations was impossible to miss. Finally, Judge Hargrove continued, his voice strained. The court apologizes for any mischaracterization of Sergeant Caldwell's military service and recognizes the authenticity of his decorations. Still, Remington did not move, his silent presence a reminder of what true authority looks like, earned through action rather than conferred by position. This court thanks Sergeant Caldwell for his service and sacrifices on behalf of our nation, Hargrove finally added, the words extracted rather than freely given. Only then did General Remington offer a crisp nod. Thank you, Your Honor. He turned to Caldwell and rendered a precise, formal salute, officer to enlisted, but also soldier to soldier, that communicated respect beyond what civilians might fully grasp. Caldwell returned the salute with equal precision, the first time his military bearing had been openly acknowledged in the proceedings. The simple exchange carried weight that transcended the legal matter at hand, speaking to bonds and values that existed outside the courtroom's jurisdiction. As the salutes were held, the elderly veteran in the front row stood and rendered his own salute. One by one, other veterans in the gallery rose and did the same. A silent tide of solidarity that spoke more eloquently than any verbal testimony. The gesture spread until more than a dozen former service members stood at attention, creating a visual record of respect that refuted the judge's dismissal more powerfully than any argument could have done. 2 weeks later, the county courthouse steps bustled with activity, but it was a different atmosphere than the usual legal business. A small podium had been set up, surrounded by members of the press and a gathering crowd of veterans in various uniforms spanning decades of service. Morning sunlight illuminated the scene, contrasting sharply with the fluorescent harshness of the courtroom where the confrontation had occurred. Attorney Alara Davidson stood to one side, speaking quietly with several officials from the State Bar Association. Their expressions suggested serious deliberations underway, occasional glances toward the podium indicating connection to the about to unfold. Thaddeus Caldwell approached the microphone, dressed in a suit similar to the one he wore in court, but now his medals were prominently and properly displayed. The gathered veterans nodded in recognition and respect, many wearing caps or pins identifying their service branches and auras. "Thank you all for coming," Caldwell began, his voice stronger and more confident than in the courtroom. 2 weeks ago, many of you witnessed or heard about an incident in Judge Hargrove's courtroom that went beyond a simple misunderstanding. It reflected a broader disconnect between civilian perceptions and military realities. The crowd murmured agreement. Several phones recorded his statement, a continuation of the documentation that had begun in the courtroom and subsequently gone viral on social media platforms. Today, I am pleased to announce that our petition for the Veterans Rehabilitation Center expansion has been approved. Construction will begin next month, creating space for an additional 30 veterans recovering from physical and psychological combat injuries. Applause broke out, genuine and sustained. The victory represented more than a legal decision. It was an affirmation of the value of the work being done and the lives it would impact. "This is not about personal vindication," Caldwell continued. "It is about ensuring that those who served receive the support they have earned. Every medal represents not just individual actions, but collective sacrifice. When we question those decorations without cause, we dishonor that sacrifice." From the side, General Remington watched with quiet approval, now in civilian clothes but still carrying himself with unmistakable military bearing. Beside him stood a younger man with a pronounced limp, Lieutenant Christopher Remington, the soldier Caldwell had carried from the battlefield years before. "I have been asked repeatedly about Judge Hargrove," Caldwell addressed the question clearly on many minds. Yesterday, the Judicial Conduct Committee announced their investigation's findings. He gestured to an official from the committee, who stepped forward to the microphone. Judicial Commissioner Larissa Okafor spoke with measured formality. Following extensive review of court records and testimony from numerous witnesses, the committee has found substantial evidence of Judge Prescott Hargrove's pattern of bias against military veterans appearing in his court. This bias has compromised the fairness of proceedings in at least 17 documented cases over the past 5 years. A ripple of reaction moved through the crowd. The number was higher than most expected, suggesting a systematic problem rather than an isolated incident. Effective immediately, Judge Hargrove has been removed from the bench pending a formal hearing on permanent disbarment. All cases involving veterans that appeared before him are being reviewed for potential retrial or settlement. The news landed with weight among the assembled veterans. Not just vindication for Caldwell, but potentially for many others who face similar treatment without the benefit of a general's intervention. After Commissioner Okafor stepped back, Caldwell returned to the microphone. "Justice is not about retribution. It is about restoration, of truth, of dignity, of the systems we rely upon to protect our communities both at home and abroad." He paused, making eye contact with several veterans in the crowd. Many who served never received formal recognition. Their sacrifices remain known only to those who stood beside them. Today's outcome is not just for those with medals, but for every veteran who deserves to be seen and heard with respect. Have you ever known someone who never asked for recognition, but deserved more than anyone else? The true measure of service is not found in the decorations, but in the lives touched and the communities transformed. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? Share your stories of unsung heroes in the comments below, and subscribe to see more moments when quiet dignity speaks louder than the loudest injustice.